Boerne Radio 103.9 FM. Coming up at 11:30 is The Power of Perseverance with Glenn Boehm. But right now is Ceasefire with Dale Adams and Ron Cisneros. The following is sponsored by the Boerne Bookshop, and this is Boerne Radio.
Welcome to Ceasefire, where civics meets civility and engagement meets empowerment. Ceasefire is hosted by former Boerne ISD trustee and owner of the Boerne Bookshop, Dale Adams, and by former Boerne City Council member and local insurance agent, Ron Cisneros.
Welcome to Ceasefire, brought to you by the Boerne Bookshop. My name is Dale Adams.
And I'm Ron Cisneros.
And today, what do we got? We've got patriotism, right?
We're going to talk about patriotism, what it is and what it isn't.
Yes, that's a conundrum because everybody accuses each other of not being a patriot. Yeah. And this appropriate day, just to let everybody know, it's Pearl Harbor Day.
Right.
This was today. So 63 years ago today is when the Japanese bombed the Pearl Harbor and got us into World War II.
Yeah.
Which was, in a way, it was a bad thing because war is bad, but it took America to save most of the world from what was coming.
Right.
So.
We were looking for a thematic topic, and it seemed like this was a good day to talk about patriotism and how it's now, like so many other words, it's starting to lose its definition and means something else, and that always drives me crazy. So I want to get us back to that root definition or that original definition of patriotism.
And I think it's good to try and understand why it becomes divisive and has drifted so much in different directions. And I think that comes from everybody wants to say that they're a patriot. And since we have so much tribalism in our society, we want to say that other people aren't.
Ooh.
So no matter which way it's going, there's always going to be an effort to divide us and them.
Yeah.
And patriotism is a big method to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great thought. One of the things I appreciate about the show is that I'll go in and Dale he's looking across, he sees all the notes that I write, and I always have this fear that I don't have enough material for a show, and inevitably I have too much material because I'm sharing airtime, right? And so there are things that escape my thought, like what you just said, and that's a really great thought. So let's dive in and talk about that. And I want to start, like I generally do, with a definition. So we're going to talk about patriotism. Let's go to the Oxford Dictionary and get their definition. And by the way, I keep using the Oxford Dictionary. Nothing against Webster's. I put in definition of X, and the first thing that always pops up is the Oxford Dictionary. So blame my computer for that.
Your algorithm.
Yes. The Oxford Dictionary defines patriotism as devotion to and vigorous support for one's country.
Okay.
Real simple, right?
The basic. Yeah,
the basic.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Maybe we should start with some examples. What do you think? Displaying the flag?
Displaying the fact that's a sort of a start.
Yeah.
Also, your service. What do you pursue in your life? I mean, a lot
Right.
of people join the military because they're patriotic, because they want to support their country. Now, some people don't. They have other reasons. Some people
Right.
just like guns, but some people just want to support their country, and they see that as a way to do it.
And on a day like today, on Pearl Harbor Day, it would be honoring veterans and honoring the war dead, and something as simple, I shouldn't call it simple, but something like that, where we memorialize an event or pay tribute to those people who fought in those battles or those wars for us.
Yeah, show gratefulness.
Right. Maybe familiarizing ourselves with our nation's history, understanding the basics of our government, or as we talked about a few shows back, understanding the separations of powers and why that's relevant. That could be a form of patriotism.
Yeah. And to be patriot, you need to understand what you love and what you're devoted to. And I think understanding your country is a very important aspect of patriotism, which I think some people lose. It's easy to just say, I love my country, and I do, but I want to understand my country too. It's important. Just like in any other relationship. You understand the other. What you're devoted to.
So what about, I'm getting a little philosophical here, what about fidelity to the Constitution? Would that make you a patriot?
That would make you a patriot of our country,
Yep.
Yes, because our country was based on a declaration of principles and then a structure of governance. Mm-hmm. And if you love our country, I shouldn't set parameters for people, but I would think that love of our country would be based on what our country represents, and which is the foundations, which were set down by the founders. I want to bring up something, though.
Sure.
What's the difference between patriotism and nationalism?
I had that on my little notes, too.
Some of our notes that overlap here, I think.
I think the key difference is that nationalism starts to look at, I think, our interests sort of above the interests of others. So it's like a patriotism on steroids.
Yeah.
I have a quote from Charles de Gaulle that I'm not entirely comfortable with. And
That's okay.
Yeah, but I'm going to read this to you because it's interesting. It goes along with what I just said, but I think it maybe takes it to an extreme, and I just got to go through my stack of notes here. But he says, patriotism is when love of your own people comes first. Nationalism, when hate for people other than your own comes first.
I think that's extreme, but I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Now, when I did my notes, I just wrote 2 words: patriotism, and love; nationalism, superiority.
Yeah.
Which I think nationalism relates to your comparison of your country to other countries. Patriotism, I think, is simply about your country and isn't really relevant to your feelings about other countries.
I think that's I think you said it better than I did.
No, but I like the quote. I like the quote because it makes it more stark. Sometimes you need to do that just to understand the subtleties of the differences. Yeah.
I'd written down in my notes also that working in our own interests first is not how we build strategic alliances or develop trade partners. And I think about this because in sales, I'm in sales, we are taught to think about the interests of the consumer first. Right. So obviously I'm an insurance sales, so I make commissions, right? I want to make commissions. That's how I put food on the table. It's how I pay my bills. But if I put my own interests first, which is those commissions, and I'm not going to be an effective salesperson. If I put the interest of my clients ahead of my own, and I think about their needs, not only will I be a better salesman, but I will inevitably take care of those commissions. So I think the problem with nationalism is we think too much about our own interests and without regard for the interests of other people. And it's not to say that our interests aren't important. We should think about those things, especially with things like regards to our borders, for example, our defense. But we're in an era, I think a lot of people are concerned about globalization and the loss of their rights. And these are, it's okay to be worried about those things. It's okay to be worried about the UN stripping you of your constitutional rights. I think the mistake that we make is that we think that then all other interests are inferior to our own, and it should be America first always.
Yeah. I mean, I see what you're saying. I'm not sure that I would bring together patriotism and foreign relations. I see those as pretty different kind of areas. Don't really overlap. I wouldn't, because I think nationalism and foreign relations overlap, because nationalism is about comparison with other countries, and so you want to strive for superiority. Patriotism, I really don't think of it in relation to foreign affairs at all, because it's about developing my country or my community or whatever it is I'm patriotic about. Sometimes they'll come into conflict with foreign affairs, but in general, I don't really put those two together that much. So I know what you're saying, but I don't know if I would put them together that much.
And I was speaking in terms of nationalism, not patriotism.
Okay.
You know, but in any case, I think that is the problem with it, is that it gets in the way of the ability to look at things in a more equitable way.
Yeah. The thing about being patriotic is you don't necessarily agree with everything in your country. And just like with your kids, just because you love your kids doesn't mean you're not going to discipline them or restrict them or have a say in what they get to do or don't get to do. And I think sometimes people try and say, if you're patriotic, you have to support everything your government does. And I don't think anybody agrees with everything the government does, no matter what your perspective is. So I think that's a lost thought.
No, it's a good distinction is what it is. And which brings me to another quote. He brought up the government, and this is from Mark Twain, and I like this one a lot. He says, loyalty to country always, loyalty to government when it deserves it.
Yes.
All right.
Big distinction there.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's important to remember that patriotism belongs to your country, not to the government.
Yeah.
So when we speak of patriotism, we're talking about the love of country, the love of our fellow citizens, the love and embrace of our cultures. and the things that make us uniquely American, right? We're not talking about the government in a limited sense, yes, the idea of separation of powers, freedom of religion, those things that make us uniquely American, but we're not talking about this loyalty to the Congress or to our senators. That's
though we do, the government is to a certain extent representative of the people,
right?
Mostly, not completely, but mostly. So I do try and tell myself that I need to respect the government as somewhat of a representation of the desires of the people, even though I think that there's a gap there that's widening as time goes on. But I think Twain's point of when it deserves it is spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think another point that's important is that sometimes patriotism means that you're standing in opposition to popular opinion in order to have your loyalty to the Constitution. So I'm speaking specifically now of American patriotism. Yeah. Sometimes we have to stand in resistance to popular opinion or to our friends, to family, to fellow countrymen, because we know that some things are just not constitutional or not correct. They're not to the benefit of America. And so being a patriot means that sometimes you're considered an unpopular jerk.
Yeah. And which just goes back to my thing about the parent is you're not always going to do what people like. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to bring up a quote that gets thrown around a lot. And that's by Samuel Johnson. It says, "Patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel." Now, people use that a lot to say that, oh, those patriots, that's all they care about, and they're not smart and stuff like that. But I want to give you a little bit of history about it. Samuel Johnson lived in 1709 to 1784, and he wrote a lot of different things. But one of the things he wrote about a patriot is his quote is, "A patriot is he whose public conduct is regulated by one single motive, the love of his country, who, as an agent in Parliament, has for himself neither hope nor fear, neither kindness nor resentment, but refers everything to the common interest." So he believed in what we call patriotism. The interesting thing is that at that time, from 1725 to 1803, there was a political party, this is in England, called the Patriot Party. His quote was about members of this, to him, opposition party. So his patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel is about people in that party. It has nothing to do with the love of country. And so that quote has been misused and abused ever since. And so it really isn't about patriotism. It's about members of this political party that he disagreed with. So when you hear that next time, say, yeah, that's not what he meant. Some people may still believe that concept,
right?
That patriotism is for people with feeble minds who can't think for themselves. But there's no historical background to that.
Oh, thank you for the education. I've heard that quote many times before, and I didn't know that. Yeah. And I actually like reading Samuel Johnson.
Oh, he's got some good ones.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
Excellent.
We're going to take a quick break here. This is Ceasefire with Dale and Ron, and we'll be right back. Boerne has its own bookshop. In fact, it's called the Boerne Bookshop. Hi, I'm Dale Adams, inviting you to get lost. Get lost in a good book in our relaxed and casual atmosphere. We have a wide and eclectic selection in the Boerne Bookshop, and we pride ourselves on finding what you're looking for. We do author meet and greets, host writing workshops, and can connect you with a good book club. And your young ones will absolutely love our kids section at the Boerne Bookshop. And while we want you to get lost, we're easy to find, as we're in the heart of Boerne at the back of the Richter Tavern building. We are the Boerne Bookshop. Welcome back to Ceasefire with Dale and Ron, brought to you by the Boerne Bookshop. And today we are talking about patriotism, what it is and what it isn't. And I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Can patriots disagree?
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely.
You sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. first off, patriotism, a lot of my fellow Republicans will think that it belongs exclusively to the Republican Party, but it does not. There are Democrats who are patriots.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shocking.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. And hey, we know you're out there. Okay, we're just having a chuckle.
Yeah. And thank you for listening.
Yes. But I think that's one of the big misunderstandings among people that call themselves patriots is that people can disagree with what they think is best for the country.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't belong, it's not exclusive to a political party, and again, it doesn't belong to the government, it belongs to the people. And one example of that is think about how many different governments France has been through, or Germany.
I lost count about 50 years ago.
Or Japan. Think about most of the European countries have changed governments or forms of government multiple times.
Yeah.
And Frenchman is still a Frenchman. An Irishman is still an Irishman. An Englishman is still an Englishman. A German is still a German. And they are still, many of them, patriots for their country, regardless of who's running the country, right? And so that's why I say it's not the government that you're patriotic about. It's your people. It's your nation, your culture. That's your identity, right?
But one of the problems I think that happens is when we have our tribalism and people adhere themselves to a party or an ideology and they consider themselves patriots, that's when they start saying the others aren't.
Right.
And they associate their patriotism with their other associations. And it mixes things up. And it's like with your kids. Mom and dad disagree about things.
Mm-hmm.
I disagree with my wife about stuff. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I always end up agreeing. But the point is, people disagree about their kids, and yet they still both love their kids, even though they have different visions and different ideas and different importances, maybe.
Right.
But they still love the kids. And as patriots, we can still love our country, even though we don't agree, even if we don't agree vehemently.
Right.
That we still all love our country.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that's difficult for a lot of people to understand. Speaking of Democrats, for many years, I think they considered themselves the guardians of the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Now, some would disagree with that today with modern Democrats, not picking on them, but some would disagree with that. But for many years, they were the bulldogs, the champions for the First Amendment. Yeah. And they saw that as a patriotic duty.
Yes, even though a lot of people disagreed with them and vilified them for it, and they pushed through and they pushed and they, it's important to do that because there's always government overreach into that area because government doesn't like to be criticized. So there's always that going on. So it's important to have people that do that. Yeah. So the next question is MAGA patriotism or nationalism, or does it even matter?
Oh my gosh. Why do you get to ask that question?
Because you didn't ask it yet.
MAGA as a movement, I think for the most part is patriotic. I think there are elements of the people involved in it, the elected officials who have nationalist tendencies. And I think that's why Democrats get alarmed by Trump and some of the candidates who run under that MAGA umbrella.
Right.
I too, as a Republican, have problems with the movement because I do see it as leaning more nationalist and away from patriotism when we look at actual policy. So I think all of the people involved in the MAGA movement are patriots. I would never question Trump's love for the United States. I think he loves the United States. I disagree with him on international policy, and a lot of the people that have come in under that umbrella are isolationists. I am not a globalist by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm also not an isolationist. I don't think that makes good sense. We operate in a world with, I forget how many countries now, I think.
190.
Somewhere in that neighborhood. We have to share oceans. We have to share airspace. We have to share space. There are so many things that we have to share. You can't isolate yourself and say, I'm just not going to. Yeah. That was tried in the early 1900s, and it didn't work, right? Yeah. I don't think globalization's working either, but this nonsense of we're just going to stick to ourselves, the world doesn't operate that way.
Yeah. I think I'd like to separate what we're talking about as the MAGA movement. You're talking about some of the leaders that you disagree with, and then the movement that you believe is basically patriotic. I think any movement, just like any organization, will have leaders and demagogues and people that want to utilize that movement as a vehicle for their own personal gain and aggrandizement. And we don't want to think that happens here in the U.S. that much or within whatever party or movement that we like, but it's always there in every movement, in every party. And we have to be aware of that because our love is for the country, not just necessarily for the movement that we believe is doing good.
Right.
So it's important to separate those two. So I agree with you a lot. There's a lot to be concerned about, but at the same time, I think it's important to recognize that a lot of our concerns, not all of them, but a lot of them revolve around the leadership rather than the movement itself.
Yeah. And I think, so I said that I think all of those MAGA followers are patriots, and I believe that because their motivation is for their country. I think they sense things being lost. When you say make America great again, that's not a bad statement.
Right.
I think, though, that there is a belief that America's gone to hell, and it's certainly different, and we have lost some things, but I don't think that we hit rock bottom, and I still think we're great.
I went and visited the Soviet Union in 1990, and I can definitely tell you we haven't hit rock bottom. That place was desolate, and we aren't even close to that.
Right.
So if people are waiting for us to hit rock bottom before things turn around, got a long wait to go, and it's not going to be fun. So I don't advocate doing that waiting process.
Yeah. If I had been in charge of that campaign in 2016, I think I would have voted against Make America Great Again. I would have said Make America Greater and just left it at that. We'd all be MAGs, not MAGAs.
Maybe. Okay. I don't know. I like the phrase because I think it's very simple and it acknowledges a lot of things that people feel, such as that we've lost some things that we wish we still had. And we've lost a lot of our, I don't know if I want to call it prosperity, but our hope for prosperity. And so I don't know. I like the statement as a statement. I think it's a good slogan, but I realize that you always got to say something different too. Okay, let's get back to patriotism. I want to mention, before I forget, the book I brought in today. And this is, if our country has any kind of scripture, I think you'd probably say that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are right there at the top of the list. And here's a book by Pauline Maier written about 30 years ago. It's called American Scripture, and it's about the creation of the Declaration of Independence, and not because it wasn't just something that Thomas Jefferson made up and said, okay, let's do this. And everybody said, oh yeah, let's go do it. It's based on prior declarations, a lot of writings on human rights and human freedoms and such. And so there's a lot of history there that went into the writing of the Declaration of Independence and the process that it went through and the way it became American scripture in the years following the creation of America, of the United States, sorry. And so it's a pretty neat book. It's this little paperback and not real big, but it's got a lot of neat history in it about how we came to that. And it really was a process, maybe 80 or 100 years long, of this thought development of humans having these God-given rights that they should be free, and that should be a basic tenet of our society. Because before then, it wasn't. Kings ruled the land, and the people served the king. And that's just the way it was. So it was a massive change of thought and governance. So, neat book.
Awesome.
We got it at the Boerne Bookshop.
I will have to put that on my to-read list, my ever-growing.
I got some more for you, too.
I know you do.
Yeah.
Every week we do this, and we have a book recommendation, and I think, oh, my gosh, I'm never going to finish all these books, you know.
Well, pick and choose the ones that really grab you. You don't need to try and read them all. I don't.
But you should.
Yes. Here's a joke. There's a professor who has a library of books in his office, just walls and walls of books, thousands of books in his wall. And a student comes in and says, gosh, look at all those books. Have you read all these books? The professor said, some of them I've actually read twice. He didn't say whether he'd read them all. Okay. Do I need to explain the joke? No, never mind. Sorry. Okay. We may end up cutting that.
Leave that one in there.
Okay, your turn.
No, I'm gonna stop right there because I'm already looking better. So we just.
Is this the interview where you just let me go on, and I just dig myself in deeper in the hole?
This is the show, like the defining moment where people say, "Rock could do that show by himself." You know? All right. In closing, patriotism. You can be a Republican, you can be a Democrat, a Libertarian, or a Whig. Yeah, you could wear a wig and still be a patriot. You could be bald and be a patriot. It's a matter of loving your country, and it's about our nation, not about our government. And
making our society great.
That's right. Again. You had to throw that in there, didn't you?
Yeah. Okay. I need to be locked up. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Ceasefire with Dale and Ron. We will be back again next week. And if you missed any of this, you can go to BourneRadio.com and catch the recordings and listen to all of our shows. Thanks for listening. Boerne has its own bookshop. In fact, it's called the Boerne Bookshop. Hi, I'm Dale Adams, inviting you to get lost. Get lost in a good book in our relaxed and casual atmosphere. We have a wide and eclectic selection in the Boerne Bookshop, and we pride ourselves on finding what you are looking for. We do author meet and greets, host writing workshops, and can connect you with a good book club. And your young ones will absolutely love our kids section at the Boerne Bookshop. And while we want you to get lost, we're easy to find, as we're in the heart of Boerne at the back of the Richter Tavern building. We are the Boerne Bookshop.